Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining. It's wonderful to see so many of you choosing to spend your Sunday evening here with us. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the How To Academy. I'm sorry we cannot all be in one room together just yet, but I'm very glad we can get together in this way, thanks to Zoom, and we can still discuss and contemplate important books and hear from their authors. I'm delighted this evening to be talking about a book which is of such relevance and is pertinent to every one of us, written in lockdown, in reaction to lockdown, and to a pandemic that's certainly shaken up our lives. Here we go. The Virus in the Age of Madness is the book which is the inspiration for this evening. It's an essay which declares now is the time to consider the effects of all of this on our minds and on our societies, and to contemplate the non-medical aspects of the experience. And as we shall do over the next hour, it looks at the many meanings we've assigned to the pandemic, meanings and thoughts that I'm sure will feel familiar to many of you. You may have discussed them with friends or with family, or they may have just reverberated around in your own heads. Was the virus a warning or a lesson from nature? Was it some sort of deserved punishment for our greed and our consumerist ways? Or have we thought whether there's positives and a chance for a new start? These are all notions and more that we are, well, they're very challenged, shall I say, in this book, and force us to examine such reactions and what they may tell us about ourselves. There's a lot to discuss and to think on, so I am incredibly pleased to have this hour or 45 minutes or so to discuss it all with Monsieur Henri Lévy, who joins us. He is, as I'm sure that you will all know, a philosopher, an activist, a filmmaker, an author of a number of other books, and a man who the New York Times says does nothing that goes unnoticed, is an intellectual adventurer who brings publicity to unfashionable political causes. I normally start off by asking our guests how they found lockdown, but I think essentially your sentiments on lockdown are going to form pretty much the basis of our entire conversation. So perhaps we can start where you begin. You cite previous pandemics and you say, in this century, Hong Kong flu of 1968, the Asian flu 10 years before, which killed, I think, 2 million. They came and went. They hardly made the news. They were erased from collective memory and from the archives. So why is there such a change this time round? Why do you find the way we've reacted so strange and so striking?
First of all, it's a fact that the way we reacted changed, for sure. It is the first time in the history of humanity, that the whole world considers health as a priority. And this is good. This never happened. In 1968, I was already a witness of that. It was a terrible plague, a terrible virus. But it is true that it hardly came in the news. It was not a priority and so on. So this is the good aspect. Now, there is another thing. What struck me, and it is nearly the beginning of the book, is the way in which we said and insisted that this pandemic of today was unprecedented. It was not. What was unprecedented is our reaction, yes, our care. But the pandemic itself is not unprecedented. There are a lot of pandemics in the 20th century, at least 3, which are which have made more disease than the COVID will do. So why were we so insistent in saying that it was unprecedented? Why? This is the start of my book, which was not. It was not. It was a terrible virus. It was a tragedy, but humanity knew since long this sort of tragedy. And as I say in the book, viruses, alas, belong to the planet. There are as many viruses in our bodies than stars in the sky. So why today this way of saying, of thinking, and of acting as if it was the first time? Unprecedented pandemic.
Why? Why then? Why do you think we had that narrative? Why did we form that narrative?
Because what is unprecedented is probably that we don't want to die any longer. is probably that there is an obscure will to consider life and death and our finitude, the fact that we are not infinite, that we are not God, as a technical problem. There is in the depth of modern mentality of us in modern age, the idea that we should get rid of viruses, of illnesses, and even of death. There is the idea that good techniques, good logistics should get rid of this unthinkable, which is illness and death. There is a will to expel death. This is the why. And this never happened before. In 40 years ago, death was part of life. The idea that you had not only to confront but to live your death was a common idea. It is a modern idea that death is a taboo. I have a friend who is a Christian aumônier, a priest who goes in the hospitals and who escorts the agonizing people in their last moments. He's a Christian priest, and he accompanies the Christian agonizing. And he says this very troubling, he made me this very strange confidence that families, before the COVID, after the COVID is worse, but before the COVID, families ask him to give to the agonizing woman or man the last sacrament, but without the agonizing knowing it, out of his knowledge, in his back. The social demand of our societies today is that the confrontation with death should be erased from our experience. And this idea of the priest asked by the family to go behind the bed of the woman or man, to do his last prayers silently, without words, is very eloquent as for this new fantasy of modern age that death has to be expelled from our experience, our imaginary.
You say that the phrase you use is, in how we've reacted to it, is psychotic delirium. So what do you mean by psychotic delirium, and who is suffering from it, or who has this? Is it governments, is it authority, or is it all of us?
All of us. There have been two forms of madness which have invaded the public space, two apparently opposite forms of madness. One is the madness of those who denied the pandemic. They were mad and criminal, by the way, of course. Trump, Bolsonaro, and many others, and some in England and some in France. This is a form of madness. But you had and you have another form of madness, which is overreaction, panicking, considering this pandemic as unprecedented, stopping to live and nearly to breathe in order to be sure that the pandemic will stay at large, and so on. This is another form of madness. So us, encouraged by the authorities, the doctors, one of the most crazy things of this moment is the abuse of authority, which some doctors did exert on us, the doctors who went on TVs on and on in a loop, saying the same things, creating anxiety, diffusing fake news, sometimes not fake news, mistakes which they believed true, which they asserted as if it was a definitive truth, and it was false. One example, I remember in France, for example, and I think it's the same in England, the first weeks of the pandemic, end of March, beginning of April, there was a motto, which is that the children were not really at risk, but that they were the most efficient vehicles of the virus. They had the virus. They would not present some symptoms. They will not die, thanks God, but they will contaminate, they will inject the virus in their parents or grandparents and so on and so on. This idea was false. It was repeated on and on for weeks, and it was false. But we can imagine, and we know the disease, the mental disease that this idea repeated in our TVs did in the mind, in the spirit, in the relationship between the children and their mummies and daddies and granddaddies and so on. A humanity which is structured by the Oedipus complex, we know that this sort of information that children are the potential killers without knowing it, without intention, of course, of their parents and grandparents, is a terrible idea. And it was repeated without any precaution, without any wisdom, on and on by these authorities who are the doctors.
But it's probably the New York Times, as I said you have some of the unfashionable political causes, and those ideas might cause a bit of offence to some people, in the sense that in this scenario we all praised and relied very heavily on the medical profession. In times like these, it seems right that they are the heroes of the hour. But you say to make physicians into supermen and women, and to endow them with extraordinary powers, requires a leap that can be taken only with help of several misconceptions. So you don't think that they necessarily are deserving of the praise and the position that we've given them?
Of course, I think they deserve. The doctors who were doing their job in the hospitals, saving our lives or the lives of our relatives, were heroes, and they were risking their life for saving ours. And this is pure heroism. And I write that in the book. But those who were not in hospital, but on TV stage, repeating on and on that there was one and only problem of medicine today, which is COVID, they were not heroes. No, they were just anxiety makers. And we were wrong to listen to them as an exclusive source of truth. What we should have done, it's true that and what we should do next time, if it happens again, is of course to make some committees of wise people. But why only doctors? Doctors, union workers, psychologist or psychiatrist, knowing what sort of disease can do in the mind, and information like what I gave, representative of NGO, of pleading for women who are victims of conjugal violence, which we know have increased in this time, teachers, parents of children having to say what was the effect of going to school or not going to school, and so on and so on. There are a lot of people whom we should have listened to, and not only doctors. So this way of saying that the only really reliable wisdom and science is the one of the doctors is a sign of our times, times of eugenism, a time of, there is various ways to call it, but it is not the best way to decide, I'm sure. For example, a point which I stress is that during the COVID, a lot of other events have happened in the world, and events which will affect our lives a lot. Geopolitical events, uh, uh, events related to what was called in the past class struggle or whatever, it would have been important to reserve at least, I don't know, 10% of the time of the news to these sort of events, to have a moment in those debates which made us drunk with a little part for that also. What did Mr. Erdogan do during this time? How did the Chinese dictatorship proceed during the same time? How did these machineries which we are using now, how are they progressing in their project of, not their project, how are they progressing in the process of spying us, entering in our privacy and so on? All these questions have to be raised also. This also is health. Health is emergency, for the first thing to do. That's why I obeyed myself to all the rules. I wore the mask when it has to be worn. I respected the confinement and so on. But I knew that beyond that, life and death was continuing.
So those and lots of that I want to come back to a little bit. Many questions that you bring up throughout the duration of the book. But one of the things you talk about is this idea of divine surprise. I said at the beginning, I'm sure many of us, when you read your book, you see yourself and think of some of the things you've done and wonder whether that was the right reaction. Many people found that amongst the tragedy, there were things to be grateful for. So we saw these images of fish in the sea in Venice, in the canals, I should say, of course, in Venice. And the skies were, blue and quieter than they've been. And a lot of people celebrated those facts. You say the notion that there were things to be glad about in those was something that you found a sort of embarrassing combination of pious sentiment and bad instincts.
Of course, for me, it was an insult to the victims, to the deaths, and to the sufferings, to convey on Instagram the beauty of the city suddenly pure, to convey the idea that we breathed suddenly better in this climate. It was, number one, it meant that implicitly that there is another virus, which is mankind itself. What does it mean? An empty city, if not a city without mankind. So there was this idea that mankind is a bore, that mankind is a sort of virus. There is a sort of Malthusian implicit tendency. And number two, for those who are really suffering, and I know what I'm talking about, it was absolutely unhearable, impossible to hear that. For those who were really suffocating, who were really struggling against death, to see, if they saw it on Instagram, the image of the good kitchen we were making, of the bird on the window, and so on, had a sort of indecency. Yes, I think so.
Do you not think that it's human nature to try and find sort of joy amongst the sadness, that we sort of have this innate need to find things to be optimistic about when all else is falling down around us?
Of course, it is human nature, and as I say also in the book, I myself had some moments I felt some moments of grace in my confined and empty city, but I knew that it was not a good feeling. I knew that it meant that mankind would be an embarrassment. I knew that I was speaking or expressing myself as people in the dark age of the history of France. Of course, it's natural. But everything is natural. The people who denounce, we had another plague in France and in some parts, in some cities of UK, plague of denunciations. People who were so afraid by the virus and by all that they were told on the TV that they called the police stations to denounce a suspect gathering of more than 5 people in the street, down the window, or who denounced someone who went 3 times to the supermarket and so on, or who denounced, by the way, there was a lot of cases, a nurse who just took a home on the floor under or above. Okay, I know it's human nature. I know people were afraid for themselves and for their relatives. Nevertheless, denunciation, délation, as we say, may be a natural sentiment, but it is a bad one. It is a bad one.
So it is a bad one in general. Then you're saying that an idea that the way we try to find meaning, we feel like it's human nature to make us feel better. We try to find meaning in a virus, but you say this is a foolish idea that the virus is speaking to us, that a virus is a virus, and we were just trying too desperately, clawing around to give it some sort of meaning.
Yeah, this is a religious approach of the phenomenon, but either you are religious or you are not. If you are, be completely religious, believe in the dogmas of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, true religions. If you are not religious, if you are secular, be secular. Don't give to this stupid virus, which is just a piece of death injected in our sane bodies. Don't give him this dignity of a speaker, a messenger, conveying us the rage of the earth or the warning of the sky. Is too much. A virus does not deserve that. A virus deserves to be combated with firmness, with bravery, but not dignified this way. This was absurd.
So it strikes me strange. It's not the virus that we're necessarily giving meaning to. It's meaning we're trying to take back for ourselves. So you say there's never a good side to any calamity, never anything useful or positive to be taken from it. But it feels that you don't agree that we can use these moments as an opportunity, as a sort of catalyst for change, a way to look at areas that need changing in the world and sort of reassess. You feel strongly against that notion.
I feel against the idea of a sudden reset. Yes, a change. I hope that since I'm writing books, a change of the world, more justice, more equality, less climate disaster. I hope that, I fight for that. But the idea to take advantage of the virus in order to stop suddenly the course of the world, to switch off the process of globalization and to restart another process, this idea I am absolutely against, because it is another form of apocalyptic sense of history, which I know have created and induced a lot of calamities. I don't believe in the blank page. I don't believe to going from night to day all of a sudden. I don't believe in all of that. I don't believe in revolution. Okay, I believe in reparation of the world. Yes, I believe that we have, and at least we have to try our best to repair every day with every gesture of our life. But this idea to consider the virus as a divine surprise, as an opportunity in order to switch off everything and to restart, this idea was a terrible one. And those who preached that knew probably, but they did not say, that for half of the planet, it would have meant a quantity of horrors and of immediate tragedies, which was also terrible and much worse than the death of the virus. For example, the very idea of the lockdown, I think it was necessary to lock down. But we have to know it was necessary, and I don't criticize that. But we have to know that in front of the lockdown, you have some countries like UK, like France, like European countries who have wealth enough, reserves enough to cross the lockdown, because we have some healthcare system, because we have some, the unemployed have, thanks God, have some rights and so on. You have to know that in half of the planet, the lockdown can mean, and probably meant, condemnation to death for a lot of people who have no healthcare system, who don't have any right when they are unemployed, who are paid day by day in a system of absolute precarity. All this should be taken into consideration by those who decide, number one, I'm sure they did, but by those who preach and by those who say we have to use the virus as a message and an opportunity.
So one of the things that comes into that people who say we use it as an opportunity, but the other thing, notion, very prevailing notion that you attack is the fact that the choice here was between life or jobs, between life and the economy. That was how we felt it was, or that was the narrative. Why do you feel that is so incorrect? This idea, stay home.
Because if you say that you have to oppose life and economy, it means that economy is death. This is what it means. If you really oppose life and economy, what does it mean? That economy is not on the side of life, so it's on the side of death, which is not true. It's life and life. Economy also is life. Economy is a way of earnings, way to feed your family, way to feed yourself, so it's life and life. It was an arbitrage. There was a necessity to make, and there is, and there will be, because there will be other viruses in the future, a necessity to make a constant arbitrage, referee, between different forms of saving lives, of course. In Bangladesh, for example, I was recently, the day the confinement stopped in France, I went to the refugee camp of Lesbos in Greece. Under the pretext of the COVID, the refugee camp of Lesbos has been completely locked down because of the COVID. Completely locked down, which has a concrete meaning for this place, that the 20,000 people who live there don't live in a camp, they live now in a jail, and not even in a jail, but in hell. There are crimes every night. There are disease of all the sorts you can imagine, and so it's pure hell. The reality is that, and I asked at the end of my stay how many COVID cases there was in the camp of Lesbos, Moria, M-O-R-I-A. There was none. At this moment, there was none. So you had this open jail in open sky of 20,000 people who, because of the COVID, were put into pure hell. So it was not, the lockdown did not save life there. The lockdown, in the case of Lesbos, created death. And there was a death. All the NGOs reported about that every night, or nearly every night, by stabbing in the streets of the camp. So it's such a complex situation. There are so many parameters who have to be put together if we can, if we keep our cold blood, which I hope we will do next time.
I suppose all of that is why you feel there's something narcissistic and selfish about the idea that being locked in for some people was a sort of time of withdrawal or contemplation. That sort of idea of lockdown strikes you then as something very selfish, something, you know, very individualistic. We weren't able to look outside of ourselves and be more community focused. You feel that? Because some people feel that this was a great moment for community.
For community, no. For family life, for small community, we are confined with our families. No, community, it means a little more than family. Community means your country, means other countries, means the remote people. Real community means that you consider the most remote also as a brother and not only your close family. But the point was not that. You had a lot of people who said, it's an occasion to look in myself, to know me better, to reconnect with my deep ego, to know better who I am, and so on and so on. And why not? But these people said, this is the most ethical behavior that one can have. You are right, I don't agree. I think that the most ethical behavior a lady or a man can have is precisely to go out of himself, to go to the others, to the wide world, and not to go inside oneself. It's not very interesting to reconnect with oneself. As a French writer said, the miserable bunch of secrets which we all of us shelter is very important. We have to preserve it from the invasion of the new technology and so on. But it is not the most important thing in the life, and it is not the best of the duty of a human being to take care of that. It's a start, but you have to go somewhere from this start. And the confinement did tell, and we said, at last, we are becoming wise, and we are going back home, and we are going back to basic ethical reflexes. No, basic ethical reflexes is to say, après vous, after you, you first, me after. This is ethics.
And I mean, in a way, I could talk about this for so much longer, because I'm sure that many people, philosophers, would say that the sort of our idea of self-contemplation and self-study is essential.
Okay, but you can look. We have not time to make a lesson of philosophy, but from the Greeks to the phenomenology, there is an agreement to say that what is essential is to look at the world. The Greek said that human being is a political animal. Descartes, when he went into himself with the experience of the cogito, sensed and said that the emergency was to get out and to go as quickly as possible to mathematics, to medicine, to ethics, to the rest of the world. Husserl and the phenomenology say that an ego is nothing but what he does, and that what is important is not what I am, but what I do, and so on and so on. So you can take the history of philosophy, they disagree on everything, all the currents, except on the fact that it is more important to do than to be, and that your majesty is not me, but is you. They all agree on that.
And that feeds into the part of the book, you know, you talk a lot about the infringement on our liberty, or the ways and means in which we're used to living. I mean, one of the things that's very much about you is the idea of being able to shake hands, and you feel that getting rid of something like that is a great shame, I understand. I mean, you referenced de Gaulle and the lepers in the past as something that we would see as kind and noble.
The shake hands is, of course, it's nearly nothing. It's just a gesture. But sometimes a gesture is the outcome of a long civilization process. And we shake hands since we stopped to look down at the others, or the slaves to look up at their masters. Shake hands is a gesture of equality, is a gesture of mutual respect, is a gesture of peace also, of deal, of contract, and of peace. So there is a lot of things. So to stop shaking hands for a moment, for weeks, for months, maybe for a year, okay, I do it myself. But entering in a world where shaking hands could be considered as a dangerous gesture or as a suspect behavior, this frightens me, because I know that it would be a subtle but decisive way back in civilization. And it will be in a world which is just looking for another reason to consider the other as an enemy. We are in this stage. Half of the planet is in a state of civil war, and even the prosperous countries, sometimes we know that there are some seeds of violence which are cooking in our cities. So for me, all that feeds this despise, this from of the other, this distrust, this way of considering him as a potential enemy, is something which has to be combated. Yes.
And you say that this sort of change we're accepting things, we're blindly accepting things, something like that we might not shake hands, and another thing you feel that we are not debating, that we're not talking about enough, that we're sort of blindly accepting, is the idea of digital tracing proposals that have been presented as a way of keeping us safe. But that is another thing that worries you about changes that are sneaking in, that infringe on our liberties, that we're not challenging in a way that you feel we should.
Yes, because I want to be safe and free, and I want my children and you and all my contemporaries to be safe and free. I don't want to get rid of my freedom because of health. We have to combine the two, and in the way in which with which we accepted these projects of spying, tracing, entering in our privacy and so on, is completely mad. Is completely mad. And I'm astonished by the road we made. 6 months ago, we were laughing at these systems, these Chinese systems. We said that there is the noble Western internet, which of course tries to enter in our privacy, but we forbid, we prevent, we are very vigilant. And there are these stupid Chinese who accept to be traced, who accept the idea of a camera who can in a crowd detect a subversive agent, and so on and so on. 6 months ago, we believed that there was two ways of dealing with high technology, and that we had the good one, and the Chinese are. 6 months after, the two are completely joining forces, and we are gently accepting to have some dogs detecting the smell of COVID, to have some brigades in France of ange gardien, keeping angels, taking our cell phones to see who are our last contacts and so on, entering in our privacy. And I told you before that for me, the reconnecting with myself is not the biggest ethical concern. But the capacity to keep a privacy is the first stone of democracy. If you don't have privacy, if you don't have an absolute respect of the borders of your space of secrecies, it is finished with democracy. Democracy is the big iceberg, is the peak of an iceberg, of which the bottom of the iceberg, the hidden bottom, is the way in which a society allows you and me and all those who are listening us now to have this sacred part of untouched, unwatched privacy. It's the first condition of democracy. All the rest comes after, and is very important. Separation of powers, all that. But this is the very definition of an individual. If you don't have that, you are mature for an Orwellian world.
There are so many different complications, I think, and they all come, to the fore probably now when we're emerging cautiously, although now perhaps going back to another lockdown. I mean, you say in the book we must muster our courage and go for real life where we laugh and cry and perhaps fall ill, but at least we will have fallen as democracy's cavalry. Those are your words. If we are looking now at perhaps locking down again, you will disagree with that. What is the best way to proceed if we find ourselves in this same situation that you feel?
If we had to lock down, it will need to be more localized, not general. In France, we had lockdowns in departments where there was 0 case of COVID. We will have, as I told you at the beginning of this conversation, I think that television channels will have to listen to others than the specialists of COVID. We will have to assure to people who have a heart attack or a brain attack that they can go to hospital, that hospital is not the new place of pest, of leprosy, of pest. We will have to do that with much more cold blood, yes. And I hope we will not.
Oh. Hello?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
We momentarily lost you at the end there, or perhaps that was just me. So I'm now going to reluctantly, well, there's some great questions coming in, and we've got 15 minutes left. I'll answer as many as I possibly can. Some of them are areas we've already been, but if you have a question, please do type it in. So someone was asking, and I'm glad to go back. They were wanting to establish what we do about listening to experts. It's a very important issue. We don't want to denounce experts or deny experts. Surely that's the way that perhaps you might see Trump going, and his relationship with the experts around him. So, how do we have this balanced approach to listening to experts and giving them the respect that they need before
we have to respect them, of course, but we have to respect also them when they say that they are in the fog. We don't have to give them more power than they require. We must not give them more authority than they pretend. They themselves, the best of them, know that they are searching and that in front of a new virus, they are at the beginning blind and then seeing a little better and so on. So with respect, of course, but with caution, which is exactly what they demand. All the scientists tell us since ages that they don't detain truth by a sort of gift of the sky. They tell us that they search it that it is difficult, that sometimes they are wrong, that sometimes they are more right, that sometimes they go backward and so on, and that they have to be followed in this way, with the respect to the process also, and not only the respect of the white blues. We have to respect the whole thing.
Somebody asks what you would say or your view of the, he says, this person says young beachgoers. I don't think they're necessarily just young. I mean, beachgoers all over, but across Europe who have no demonstrable concern, he says, for the illness, for COVID.
I think that we are all concerned. We are all concerned because it's a matter of solidarity. Even we are concerned if we are concerned by our elders. We are concerned if we are concerned by the poorest. So we are concerned, and this is one of the rare good news of this period, is that the majority of us felt concerned by the rest of by the most vulnerable also. Even if you were not, myself, for example. I'm not so young, but for some reason, I felt I am not afraid for myself. Maybe because I feel in good health, maybe because I was confronted a few times in my life to other sort of disease or sufferings. I was not afraid for myself, but I'm afraid for my relatives. I'm afraid for my the ancients. And I was so sad to know that some of my ancients were dying in loneliness, in despair, in sorrow, and when they died without any funeral. So I was obsessed by the concern, even if I did not feel, maybe I was wrong, we'll see. I did not feel personally in danger. But I was obsessed by the danger of the others, of course. And I have some friends who died, and some dear friends who died of the COVID, and I was minute after minute trying to follow their recovery, and the 2 cases I'm thinking they're non-recovery.
So that's you had a great concern, an anxiety that many of us have, and someone says, how then do we fight this anxiety that sort of so many people are suffering as a result of this?
The whole Ben, what do you mean?
Anxiety. How do we fight the anxiety that so many people are suffering as a result of this?
There is 2 sorts of anxiety. When anxiety in front of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who went through the hospitals in UK and in France. Anxiety in front of all the deads, that's okay. But anxiety in front of the very fact of living, of going, I know in France of some people who don't even dare to go out, to open the door, and therefore to open their heart. This is too much anxiety. We have another example. We have in France, which I think is the great progress of civilization, a law which obliges the parents to send their children to school. I think it's sort of the same in UK, but not exactly. In France, it is the law, école publique obligatoire, obligatory school. Okay, and it's very important because it is a condition for a little more equality, for the children of the privileged families to be mixed with the children coming from poor families, and so on and so on. And homeschooling is a way to perpetuate the privilege, of course. For the first time, I feel in France that the anxiety reached such a summit, such a peak, that the very principle of the common school, obligatory, is shaking. You have some movements in France, you have some trends. I see even very close people of me who say that at the end of the day, Should school be really obligatory? Why not go back to homeschooling, which is safe schooling, and so on and so on? This is too much anxiety. And this is an anxiety which will very soon create a new trend of unfairness, of inequality, of differentiation, social. The way, by the way, the way we speak of different distanciation sociale, social distancing, in the US, in UK, in France, social distancing. Now we try to say physical distancing, but social distancing, which was repeated on and on, it was a slip of the tongue. Social distancing, as you know, a lot of people gave their life throughout the centuries to reduce social distancing, to fight against social distancing, because social distancing means, again, like for the seconds, means the despise of some, considering the majority of the others. So social distancing, the word itself was badly chosen. We should have said physical distancing, which now in France, at least, we try to say. But at the beginning, the first reflex was social distancing. It was not a progressive rhetoric in order to confront the virus. At least not to say more, it was not a progressive rhetoric, social distancing.
So another person asks, as we've talked about, our reaction to COVID, what they say sort of reflects the sort of society and the state of society as it is. So what do you think that means, they say, are the risks for us as a society post-COVID? And do you have optimism about, Western society and culture picking up post-COVID, if there is such a thing as post?
I have optimism, of course, if number one, we recover our cold blood, and if number two, we really decide to enter in the world after, which means not to confine in ourselves, but to continue trying to change the world. This is the two conditions. I'm optimistic. If we start again trying to repair the world, number one, and if we don't continue to consider the woman or the man we cross in the street as a potential enemy, if we get rid of these two tendencies to confine in ourselves and to consider the other as enemy, if we get rid soon of that, I'm optimistic, of course.
It's interesting within the narrative of respect for others, what you think about the idea of people who at the moment don't want to wear masks, who don't want to obey the rules in their own way. That suggests a sort of a lack of respect for others.
Of course. To refuse to wear a mask is a lack of respect. Yes, I agree with that. I was in a plane a few minutes ago. I was in the airport. I was in a cab. I wore a mask. Yes, but I do hope with all my heart that in some month we will get rid of this horrible mask. I do it, but I think it is horrible. I think that this masked humanity is like a ghost humanity. We are reduced at this moment at the state of, I don't know, semi-ghost. So we have to, but we have also to hope to get rid of that as soon as possible. And I hope we are not too many to think that at the end of the day, the mask is a way of dressing as the other. After all, we have a shirt. Why don't keep a mask? When the pandemic will be finished, there will be other viruses, then there will be microbes. So why not keep the mask? This would be, for me, a horrible reflex.
And someone asks about your point of view on what's occurring in the US under the Trump administration. It's one of the things you talk about. He comes up again and again in the book, and particularly at the end when you say goodbye world, and you've touched on it, the things that we aren't talking about at the moment that we should be? I mean, obviously attention is on Trump and the way he's dealing with the virus, but is that to the detriment of other things we should be talking about?
The attention is on Trump, the attention is on virus, on COVID, and during we are focused on COVID and on Trump. As I said before, some bad guys in the world, Putin, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, the Iranian Ayatollah are sophisticating their weapons, are manipulating their populations, are torturing in Kurdistan or in Syria and so on, out of our knowledge. Yes, this is one of, I do in the book a very simple exercise. I choose a week and I make the list of the events which we were not aware of during this week, because we were speaking only and thinking, myself, by the way, also, COVID. The events which we missed during this week are honestly, it's a chapter of the book, huge, enormous, and they imply they can be the source of a real change of the world, disastrous with some casualties, disease, slavery for some, and so on and so on. Yeah. Even when we were, just a very simple example, you told me before, why not admiring the blue sky in the at the window of my apartment? Okay, why not? Because at the same time, the same week, the fire in Amazonia, which is the lung of the planet, the fire was going on even more than ever, because the criminals of the nature, the real one, were those who put the fire in Amazonia, in Brazil, were taking advantage of our distraction to put fire on and on, more and more, and burning quantities of bush and so on and so on. So this is the point I try to make. Again, we have to try to be more wise, more cold-blooded, and more balanced. We have to see at the same time the beauty of the sky without humanity. Okay, let's admit, but also the burning of the woods, of the forest in Amazonia, which is much more important and which is a far bigger disaster than any other contamination.
Well, we're going to have to draw it to a close there, but thank you so very much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. We will be circulating, I think, a video of the event around afterwards, and I'm pretty sure a link to somewhere that you can buy the book from a nice independent bookshop. So thank you all very much, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.